At the special couples gathering, he took the stage with a smile that tried to appear informal but had the pretension of someone accustomed to dominating any space they step into. The room was packed, every table arranged with glasses glistening under the soft light, candles lit, and background music almost too rehearsed to be spontaneous. When he called my wife by name, I thought it was strange. When he said he wanted to give her a gift, my body froze. And when he kissed her on the mouth, in front of everyone, as if she were his, I understood that she had long since ceased to be mine. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice. I simply raised my soul. I stood, wiped my hands on the white tablecloth, and announced, "We're getting a divorce." The sentence fell like muffled thunder on a cloudy day. Absolute silence. None of the couples dared laugh, comment, or joke. No one dared. And in that moment, with the bitter taste of betrayal cracking in the back of my throat, I felt peace. The peace of someone who had been dying for a long time and finally accepted that it was no longer a home, it was a ruin. She tried to speak, tried to follow me to the car, to beg in the rain that fell immediately afterward as if the universe wanted to wash away the stage of the shameful spectacle she had just staged. But it was too late. Long before the kiss, she was no longer with me. Long before that gesture, she had already crossed the line that cannot be undone. It was an impulse, she said. A mistake. But impulses don't arise in the moment. They come from afar, fueled by hidden desires, deleted messages, overextended schedules, and averted glances. And the mistake is a choice poorly disguised as weakness. The lover, the one who thought himself irresistible, was blunt. He wanted nothing more than that moment. Nothing more than the euphoria of showing off his conquest. To him, she was just another ego victory. And there, in a few seconds, she realized she had traded an entire love for an empty fantasy. I moved on. And not because I stopped loving. I moved on because I discovered that loving alone is going in circles. I found happiness where I least expected it, in the eyes of someone who looked at me as if they saw, not as if they measured. Someone who understood that respect isn't a mere kindness, it's the foundation of any lasting affection. When my ex-wife came to me again, weeks later, with red eyes and a wounded soul, I listened. Not because I wanted to get back together. But because forgiveness frees the one who gives it, not the one who asks for it. I reached out and said I understood. But rebuilding requires two, and I was no longer there. What happened between us became a book I'd already closed. The pages no longer hurt. But there was something curious. The more she tried to explain, the clearer the truth she refused to accept became. She didn't feel guilty for me, she felt guilty for herself, for having lost the place where she was loved without having to prove anything. Because in the end, that was it. With me, she could be fragile, she could be herself. But she traded it for a place where there were only mirrors, and now she lived staring at herself alone. What no one knows is what happened next. When the pain stopped bleeding and turned into a scar, I smiled again. I went out again. I started listening to music I'd previously avoided because it reminded me of her. I discovered that changing course wasn't cowardice. It was courage. And on one of these new paths, I met someone who didn't want to win me over, she wanted to know me. She didn't need to shine brighter than the others. She shone for me. Calmly, truthfully. And it was then that I realized that love didn't end when I was betrayed. It just changed its address. My ex-wife, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. She tried, more than once, to find what she lost in other faces. She kissed other lips, attended other events, tried to do with others what she once had with me. But she discovered, the hard way, that it's impossible to repeat a story without its essence. And one day, in a desperate attempt to search for what would never return, she tried to repeat the same gesture that destroyed our marriage. She kissed another man, just like that, out of the blue. On impulse. But there, no one stayed. Not the man. Not the looks. Not the applause. There was only embarrassment. And loneliness. What once seemed like boldness turned into despair. And in that moment, she felt everything I felt in that room, but in silence, without an audience, without a chance for redemption. She came back to me. Not to get back together, but to say she understood now. She said she lost me out of pride, out of vanity, out of that stupid urge to experience what the world portrays as freedom. And that she only discovered the value of what she had when she realized she wasn't special to anyone else. With you, I was unique, she confessed. I believed her. But I didn't go back. Because it didn't hurt anymore. Because the love we had, even true, no longer existed. And loving someone from the past is like trying to fit into a sheet that no longer fits. It doesn't fit anymore. Today, she lives well. Or tries to. She displays an organized life, perhaps to convince others, perhaps to try to convince herself. But there's something in her eyes that doesn't lie. A weariness disguised by makeup. An absence that not even the mirror can fill. Me. I move on. Not with anger. But with the peace of someone who didn't need to hurt to be happy. The funny thing is that, for a long time, I thought the greatest pain of my life had been that betrayal. But it wasn't. The greatest pain was realizing that everything we built together, all the trust, all the little things that made our story uniquely ours, all of that ended without a final hug. Without a sincere apology. Without even a look that said, I was stupid. And yet, perhaps the greatest irony of this story is that it was precisely this pain that pushed me to become my best self. She lost someone who would have stayed forever. And I lost someone who never truly stayed. But what happened in the end, what she did, trying to replicate the same gesture that destroyed everything, is something not even I expected. That's when I understood that regret, when it comes too late, becomes punishment. And redemption, when sought in broken mirrors, hurts more than it saves. And it was exactly at that moment, that everything changed. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize and never support any type of betrayal. All the stories told are fictional, but reflect deep emotional truths. Betrayal destroys, corrodes and leaves marks that not even time can erase. Our goal is to show the real consequences of wrong choices and to value what many only realize after they lose it, true love. Prepare yourself. What you're going to hear now is a shocking story, and perhaps, a mirror for many inattentive hearts. Good story. They met on a seemingly unforeseen afternoon, in a corner bookstore where time seemed to slow down. He was absently leafing through an old novel when he heard a low laugh coming from the aisle next door. That laugh was unhurried, uninterested in attention, but it had the effect of stopping everything around them. When his eyes met hers for the first time, there was a lightness there that disconcerted him. It wasn't one of those cinematic encounters with stumbles, books falling, and hands accidentally touching. It was something much quieter and, for that very reason, more memorable. His name was David. She, Emily. And that day, neither of them knew they were beginning a story that for years would be the foundation of what they would call home. David was a quiet man, the kind who listened more than he spoke and rarely interrupted anyone. He worked restoring antique furniture, a passion he inherited from his grandfather and turned into a profession. His hands were marked by years of varnishing, woodcutting, and patience. Emily was a high school literature teacher, passionate about classics and the subtleties most people ignore. She had a way of looking at others that made you feel truly seen. And that was exactly what David felt from the start, that she saw him. Not just listened to him, she saw him. Not with her eyes, but with her soul. She understood him when he couldn't put his feelings into words, and he offered her the calm she never knew she needed. Their relationship was built on small but meaningful gestures. Handwritten letters, lunches in simple places, afternoons reading together on the couch, silences that didn't weigh them down. There was a complicity between them that didn't need to be constantly declared. When they decided to move in together, there were no grand speeches, just the mutual certainty that they were ready. The apartment was modest, but full of details that reflected who they were. Books stacked everywhere, carpentry tools shared space with coffee mugs, pillows with quotes from favorite authors, yellow lights hanging with exposed wires that added charm to the place. It was a home with a unique identity, with a story being written in every everyday gesture. The wedding came after 3 years of living together. It was a simple ceremony in the garden of Emily's parents' house, surrounded by close friends and family. There was no ostentation, but there was truth in every glance exchanged, every laugh, every impromptu dance in the middle of the lawn. David seemed incredulous that she had chosen him. Emily smiled as if she knew exactly where she wanted to be. That night, as they lay side by side for the first time as husband and wife, they made no grand plans. They talked only about how they wanted to grow old together, to have lazy Sundays, to build a bigger library. Their happiness was quiet, almost discreet, but deeply rooted. In the early years of their marriage, everything seemed to flow naturally. Emily maintained her school routine, preparing lessons with dedication and passion, and was admired by students and colleagues alike. David continued restoring furniture, expanding his studio with care and love for his craft. Little by little, they began to build new dreams, a small house in a quieter city, unplanned road trips, adopting a dog they named Oliver. Life flowed like a calm river, with few rocks and plenty of clear water. And even when the difficult days came, because they did, as in any relationship, there was a deep respect between them. They argued sometimes, of course, but never disrespectfully. They always ended up talking late, lying on the couch, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing at how stubborn they could be. David trusted Emily with the abandon of someone who held no reservations. He never felt the need to snoop on her phone, question her schedule, or her friends. She, in turn, felt safe with him, though she sometimes displayed silent restlessness, a kind of hunger for something she couldn't name. Sometimes she'd look out the window as if searching for something that wasn't there. David noticed, but didn't insist. He believed that everyone carries questions that need time to be answered. And he was patient. Very patient. Little by little, they began attending couples meetings hosted by a local social group. These events were designed to strengthen bonds, share experiences, and create support networks. David wasn't a fan of crowds or open exchanges about his private life, but he knew it was good for Emily, so he went. She, on the other hand, flourished in these settings. She enjoyed listening to stories, being moved by testimonies, connecting with other couples, feeling part of something bigger. At these meetings, they met other couples with different dynamics, different forms of love, different choices. And although David never felt completely comfortable, he made a point of accompanying Emily, sitting next to her with the same calm gaze as always. It was during these encounters that almost imperceptible changes began to emerge. Emily began dressing up more, with a vanity she hadn't seen so often before. Nothing exaggerated, just details David noticed, different perfumes, new lingerie, a sparkle in her eyes that seemed to want attention. He complimented her sincerely, finding it beautiful to see her rediscovering herself. Emily smiled and thanked him, but sometimes looked away as if hiding a secret she couldn't yet name. David didn't insist. He preferred to believe it was just a phase, a wave of self-discovery, a natural movement experienced by someone who's been in the same relationship for years and is seeking to reconnect with themselves. There were nights when Emily would take a while to come home. She'd blame meetings with colleagues, rehearsals for school performances, happy hours that stretched on. David trusted her. He'd make dinner, let the wine brew, take care of Oliver, read a little, wait. When she arrived, he'd smile, ask how her day was, if she was tired. Emily would respond in short sentences, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes silently. And David, with his patience, which was also his weakness, accepted. He believed in time. He believed in her. At home, affectionate gestures began to dwindle. Kisses became quick greetings. Conversations became matter-of-fact. Touch became increasingly rare. But none of these absences seemed serious enough to generate suspicion. David attributed it to routine, to fatigue, to adult life crushing romance into small, daily installments. Emily, for her part, sank into silent reflection, as if fighting something she wasn't sure she wanted to overcome. On social media, the couple's memories were still there, past trips, smiling photos, loving captions. But no new images were posted. Emily was avoiding the camera. Davi didn't insist. He sensed a distance, but he clung to the idea that every relationship goes through phases. He remained present. He made breakfast, wrote notes, suggested outings. Emily would be grateful, but her eyes seemed elsewhere. As if she were in transit between two worlds, the one she lived and the one she desired. Her circle of friends also began to change. Emily approached new people in the couple's group, especially a more lively, freer, more spontaneous group. People who valued immediate pleasure, who talked about living in the present without so many constraints. David observed, but didn't judge. He sensed she needed a change of scenery, free laughter, and conversations that didn't always revolve around the same topics. He supported her, even when he felt she was slowly moving away from him to get closer to something he couldn't reach. It was at this point that the invisible balance began to crumble, subtly but steadily. Small changes in looks, gestures, and the time spent together. David began to wonder, silently, if he had done something wrong. If he had stopped being interesting, man enough, companionable. If his calm was actually indifference. If his love, which was serene, seemed too lukewarm for someone who might be looking for fires. But he said nothing. He continued to offer flowers on Fridays, prepare dinners on birthdays, write dedications in the books he read and wanted to share. He continued to believe. Meanwhile, Emily lost herself in thought. Sometimes, in the shower, she let the water run as if it could wash away her guilt, her doubt, her confused desire. She felt torn in two. One part loved the life she'd built with David, the history, the companionship, the security. And the other part burned with desire for something new, for a different kind of attention, for a spark she couldn't tell if it existed or was just an illusion fueled by the dissatisfaction of someone who'd never learned to handle the lull. But he hadn't done anything yet. He was still there. He still slept in the same bed, still shared the same routine, still hugged his husband when he woke up. There was still time. There was still a chance to return, to reconnect. Or maybe not. And unbeknownst to David, the days were counting backwards. It was on a night when nothing seemed different that everything fell apart. The room was decorated for another of those couples gatherings Emily loved so much, with tables arranged in pairs, warm lights hanging from translucent curtains, and soft music playing in the background, the kind that tries to warm already lukewarm hearts. David was wearing the shirt she'd complimented him on months before, had cut his hair, groomed his beard, applied perfume, and held a smile that insisted on staying. Emily, as always, had arrived looking beautiful. So beautiful that he noticed her more than usual, as if something in him told him her gaze was no longer on him. And indeed, it wasn't. Since the beginning of the night, she'd been exchanging glances with someone across the room, and David saw it. He felt it. But he didn't understand. He preferred not to believe it. When the event's host, a confident, outgoing, and notoriously charismatic man, took the stage with his glass in hand, the room fell silent. He delivered a relaxed speech about the importance of mature love, conscious choices, and freedom within relationships, and it was when he mentioned Emily's name that time seemed to stand still. "I wanted to do something special today," he said, smiling, "and offer a gift to the woman who has illuminated our meetings with her presence, with her energy." Eyes turned to her, discreet applause erupted, but David froze. "Emily, come here." She hesitated. David held her hand for a second, but she let go with a restrained smile. She crossed the room with tense but firm steps. When she reached the stage, he pulled her into a tight embrace. And then, without another word, he kissed her. A kiss that wasn't one of friendship, nor respect, nor naive impulse. It was a kiss of possession, of intimacy, of certainty. The silence that followed was total. Someone dropped a glass. Another cleared their throat nervously. But David's entire world crumbled in a single second. He didn't blink. He simply stood, adjusted his chair, wiped his hands on the white tablecloth, and said, with a serenity that contrasted with the earthquake tearing him apart inside, "We're getting a divorce." And then he left, amid the silence of a crowd that no longer knew where to look. Emily ran after him in the parking lot. She called his name 3 times. She tried to grab his arm, but he just turned and said she didn't need to hear any more. "You made your choice. I just didn't know it was public." She began to cry right there, in the cold concrete. She said she didn't know what came over her, that it was a mistake, that it had all happened too quickly. David didn't answer. He just got in the car and drove away. That night, he didn't sleep. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the fan, replaying every look, every silence of the last few months. And it hurt. How it hurt. But a part of him, hidden somewhere in his chest, felt something like relief. The doubt was gone. In the days that followed, she texted, called, and wrote long, desperate emails. David didn't respond. He filed for divorce peacefully, handling all the legal procedures with surgical efficiency. Emily moved into a small rented apartment, taking few things with her. David was left with Oliver, the dog, the books, the furniture, and the emptiness. The routine without her was strange, but it was also silent. And the silence, after so many lies, began to feel like a gift. She tried to stay with her lover, but he made it clear he didn't want commitment. "It was just a moment," he said. "Don't make a fuss where there isn't one." Emily cried. She begged. But she was ignored with the coldness of those who never committed to anything but themselves. And that's when she understood the depth of the abyss that had been created. She lost everything. And no one wanted to stay to rebuild it with her. Meanwhile, David was slowly starting over. He resumed old hobbies, went on a solo weekend trip, rebuilt his studio, rearranged furniture, and donated old clothes. Did he miss her? Yes. But the longing wasn't for her, it was for what he believed they had. Emily was no longer part of the present. She became a story that ended with a period. And it was at this point in the narrative that the most profound twist occurred. Months later, Emily reappeared. Not to apologize, but to talk. They sat on a park bench, hidden from view, hidden from memories. She told him she still loved him. That she would love him forever. That what they had was real, that she had lost herself for a moment, but that she had never stopped feeling. David listened to her in silence. He looked into her eyes and said, "I thought I would love you forever too. But today I understand that love only survives when it is cared for. And you threw it away." She held his hand, and for a moment, he almost gave in. But then he saw desperation in her eyes, not love. He saw loneliness, not sincere regret. He slowly released her hand and stood up. In the following days, she tried to rebuild her image. She returned to attending events and began dating other men. And it was during one of these encounters, in a bar filled with artificial lights and forced laughter, that she, intoxicated by a mixture of alcohol and regret, tried to repeat the same gesture. She was in front of a young, charismatic, smiling man. In the middle of the conversation, she pulled him by the collar and kissed him. She thought she would get the same response, the same charm, the same adrenaline rush. But the man pushed her away with an expression of revulsion. "Are you crazy?" he asked, adjusting his clothes. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of surprise, it was one of contempt. People around looked, chuckled quietly, whispered. She ran to the bathroom, closed the door, and looked in the mirror. For the first time, she saw herself as she truly was. Alone. Disfigured inside. Without the gaze of someone who admired her. Without the silent affection of someone who waited for her every night with a hot meal and a smile. And there, in front of her reflection, she understood what she had lost. And that there would be no repeat. There would be no going back. David learned of what had happened days later from a mutual friend. He didn't react with revenge, nor with pleasure. He just sighed. A long, resigned sigh. It wasn't his anymore. But there was something deep in his chest, something that pulsed like a healed scar. A certainty. That love isn't destroyed by a mistake. But by the insistence on denying what was lost. And it was in this certainty that he found love again. Someone who didn't make grandiose promises, but rather sincere gestures. Someone who didn't say, "I love you," every day, but demonstrated it with every care, every touch, every look. With her, he relearned to trust, to laugh, to believe. Not because he wanted to replace the past. But because he understood that the past didn't deserve his future. Emily, in turn, began to carry an emptiness no one saw. On social media, smiling photos. In real life, sleepless nights, half-drunk glasses, and long silences. And deep down, perhaps she knew that the worst punishment wasn't losing him. It was knowing that someone truly loved her, and that she chose to let go. And it was at that exact point that everything truly changed. Because love, when it leaves and never returns, leaves a space that no one can fill. And not everyone gets the chance to feel the weight of what they let slip away. Emily felt it. Every day. Time moved on with the coldness of someone who waits for no one. David's life took shape, taking on new contours, new habits, new serene passions. After the divorce, he spent months in silence, not for lack of words, but because he knew the noise within needed space to be understood. It was during this period that he immersed himself in work, renovating the studio with his own hands, and redoing the rooms in the house with the same dedication with which he had previously tended his marriage. Home ceased to be a museum of memories and became a mirror of who he was becoming. And when he least expected it, he found someone who didn't try to glue the pieces back together, but admired his reconstruction. She appeared as someone who didn't want to heal anything, only to add to it. She had a calm smile, a direct gaze, and a way of listening that required no explanations. It was different. There was no rush, no exaggerated promises. She simply stayed, and that was enough. David allowed himself to love again, but now without illusions of eternity, only with the mature surrender of someone who knows the value of loyalty and presence. Emily, on the other hand, plunged into a silent downward spiral. After the scandal at the event, and after the rejection of the man with whom she tried to repeat the gesture that destroyed her marriage, she lived between desperate attempts to prove she could still be loved and moments of painful introspection. She created a meticulously controlled routine to avoid going crazy. She woke up early, feigned productivity, posted smiling photos, and went on empty dates. But when she lay down at night, emptiness swallowed her. It wasn't David's absence that was destroying her, it was her own absence. She lost the woman she was when she was with him, lost the peace of being accepted without masks. She tried to find replacements, but no new face knew her quirks, no new hand fit like his, no new conversation silenced her fears. The regret wasn't theatrical, it was visceral. It coursed through her, burning every good memory with the acidity of someone who has destroyed something precious with their own hands. Months turned into short years. And it was on a random late afternoon, in a quiet park, that their paths crossed for the last time. She walked slowly, as if hoping to find something without knowing exactly what. He was sitting on a bench, reading a book, with a serenity that unsettled her. When their eyes met, there was a silence that said it all. She approached, unsure of what to say. He smiled, respectfully, but without nostalgia. Emily asked if he was okay. David said yes. She commented that he seemed at peace. He simply nodded. And then, in a gesture that wasn't one of reconciliation, but of closure, she thanked him. For truly loving me, even when I didn't know what to do with it. David held that gaze for a moment, as if recognizing an echo from the past, and responded with the lightness of someone who had forgiven long before hearing the request, "I hope you find yourself, truly." She smiled, her eyes filling with tears, and walked away without looking back. They both knew there were no more bridges. Their reunion didn't rekindle anything. It didn't spark anger or hope. It was simply the dignified ending the story demanded. He returned to his book. She returned to silence. And in that moment, it became clear that they were both still alive, but on completely different paths. David remarried years later. The ceremony was small, intimate, with few people and a lot of meaning. There was no longer a need to show anything to anyone. There was only the desire to share a life with someone who understood the value of unspoken words. In the new home, there were hand-painted paintings, shared books, recipes tested together. And there was respect. Every day. Oliver, now older, was still the faithful companion, now torn between two calm hearts. Peace finally ceased to be a wish and became routine. Emily moved to another city. She began teaching at a different school, attempting to rebuild her story away from the eyes that still associated her with the scandal. She lives alone in a well-decorated apartment, with plants and modern paintings, but with no witnesses to her silences. Sometimes she dreams of the past, and wakes up trying to remember the smell of the coffee David made on Sunday mornings. Other times, she finds herself laughing alone at some inside joke she no longer has anyone to share. And when homesickness hits her, she writes letters she never sends. Letters to a man who no longer belongs to her. Time didn't erase what happened, but it transformed everything into memory. A memory she holds with pain, and he with learning. Both moved on, but only one of them found peace. And perhaps this is the true punishment of betrayal, not the loss of the other, but the loss of the best version of oneself, which only existed alongside the betrayed. If you've made it this far, please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments. Which part touched you most? Do you think David should have forgiven? Or that Emily deserved everything she went through? Your opinion matters, and we'd love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, which show the real side of human emotions, without fantasy or romanticization. And here's the thought: betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys affection, admiration, friendship, and trust. It kills the foundation that sustains love. The person you love today may be the one you'll beg to return one day. But not all love survives disrespect. Sometimes the wound heals. But the person never comes back. This channel does not support, encourage, or justify any type of betrayal. Here, we value loyalty, truth, and love built on respect. Thanks for listening to the end. See you in the next story.